You know, when a building is first constructed, the concrete is poured, the steel beams are hoisted and bolted into place. It becomes this fixed physical reality.
Right. It's a structural fact. Clean, inarguable, and, entirely immune to your opinion of it.
Yeah, exactly. You can stand there, look at the architectural blueprint, and say with absolute certainty, this load-bearing wall is exactly right here. But how you actually live inside that house, that is completely fluid.
Oh, totally. Like which room feels cold and uninviting. Or,
Or which hallway you actively avoid walking down.
yes, because, I don't know, maybe the dim lighting reminds you of somewhere else entirely. That part of the architecture changes based entirely on you.
Right. The physical structure is locked in time, but your lived experience of that structure is subjective. It's like this ongoing negotiation.
Yeah, it really is.
And that brings us to the architecture of our own lives. You know, the events, the memories, the defining moments that have already happened to us. We tend to treat our difficult pasts like we're trapped inside a haunted house.
Like, we're completely at the mercy of the walls around us.
Exactly. We forget, or, well, maybe we never realized in the first place, that we actually have immense agency over how we live within that space. So for anyone joining us today who loves deep learning and those big aha moments, we have a really fascinating mission.
We really do. This is a game changer.
Today, we are unpacking a profoundly dense and transformative text titled Acceptance, Non-Hatred, and Forward Transformation. And the goal for this deep dive is to figure out exactly how we can radically rethink our relationship with our own history.
Which is something literally everyone struggles with. I mean, whether they admit it or not.
Oh, 100%. So, okay, let's unpack this because the foundational premise we're dealing with sounds simple on the surface, but it's actually incredibly confrontational to how we usually operate.
Confrontational is the perfect word for it.
Right. The idea is that what has been done is already complete. It exists as part of the unfolding of experience, and no amount of internal resistance can ever remove it from having occurred.
It really forces us to confront a delusion that we indulge in, like, every single day.
What do you mean by delusion?
Well, we spend an astonishing amount of psychological energy trying to negotiate with yesterday. I mean, think about it. We replay conversations in the shower.
Oh my gosh, yes. Imagining the clever comebacks we didn't say.
Exactly. We bargain with the universe about how things should have gone differently. But the reality being presented in this text draws a hard line. The event has completely finished unfolding.
There's this crucial distinction made right away, which is that the past is fixed in form, but not in meaning.
Right.
And that separation between form and meaning. I mean, it feels like the skeleton key to this entire philosophy.
It absolutely is the hinge on which everything else turns. When we talk about the past being fixed in form, we're talking about the concrete and steel beams of your house analogy.
Well, the raw data.
Yes, the raw data of what happened is immovable. Who was in the room, the specific words that were said, the loss you experienced, the contract that fell through, the form is locked. You cannot unpour the concrete.
But the meaning.
Right, the meaning, the narrative weight you attach to that form, that is entirely malleable.
I feel like we conflate the two constantly, though. Like, we experience a failure, which is the fixed form, and we immediately assume the meaning is just as immovable.
We do. We decide the failure means we are inherently incompetent or that we'll never succeed in that industry.
We just assume the event and the interpretation of the event are the exact same object.
Exactly. We think because a terrible thing occurred, it must perpetually mean that the world is unsafe or that we are broken. We fuse the raw data with our deepest insecurities.
And this is where we get into the core mechanics of our own pain, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Because the argument being made by the author is that our suffering does not actually come from what was done to us. It comes from our continued active rejection of it.
Specifically, the text points to, quote, the hatred toward what has already taken place.
What's fascinating here is how the author isolates hatred as the specific glue that binds our attention. The use of the word hatred is brilliant because it strips away all the melodrama we usually associate with that word.
Right, because we usually think of hatred as this hot, fiery, interpersonal emotion, like screaming at someone.
Yeah, exactly. But in this framework, hatred is a mechanical function. It's the active, ongoing refusal to accept the form of reality. It's literally a structural tension. Hatred artificially keeps a past event alive in the present.
Okay, I want to visualize this for a second. Think of a massive, heavy boulder dropped right in the middle of your path.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
That boulder is the past event.
Yeah.
It's inconvenient, it's frustrating, and it is firmly fixed in form. It is not going anywhere.
No amount of wishing is going to vaporize the boulder.
Exactly. But the suffering isn't the boulder itself. The boulder is just sitting there doing nothing. The suffering is you and me choosing to stand there day after day, exhausting ourselves by pushing against an immovable rock.
Trying to force it backward up the hill.
Right. Instead of just walking around it.
That is such a good way to put it. The boulder is just the form. Your hands bleeding from pushing against it, that is the hatred. That is the resistance.
Yeah.
And if we look at the mechanics of that, notice how much sheer effort it takes. Pushing against an immovable object requires constant, grueling output.
You're burning massive amounts of psychological fuel.
Exactly. Your muscles are screaming, your nervous system is flooded with stress, and the boulder hasn't moved a single millimeter.
But, recognizing that you're bleeding from pushing a boulder doesn't magically make you stop pushing it.
No, it doesn't.
The physical exhaustion is obvious, but the psychological release is incredibly unintuitive. Like, how does a person functionally drop their hands? If pushing against the rock is what's causing the pain, how do we actually move forward?
Which naturally leads us to the proposed solution in the text.
Right. But wait, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second, because this brings up a massive internal conflict.
Go for it.
If a terrible injustice happened to you, doesn't releasing opposition sound dangerously close to, like, toxic positivity? Aren't we just letting bad behavior slide?
Yeah, that's the immediate fear.
I mean, if I stop pushing the boulder, it feels like I'm accepting defeat and declaring that what happened to me was perfectly fine.
This raises an important question, and honestly, it's the most valid resistance anyone has to this concept.
Right.
We naturally equate acceptance with endorsement.
Yes.
We think if we drop our hands, we are basically signing a permission slip for the person who hurt us.
Yeah.
But the text explicitly dismantles this. There is an incredibly precise clarification here.
Which are...
To move forward is not to deny what happened, nor is it to justify it. It is solely about releasing the need to oppose it internally.
Wait, nor to justify it. That completely changes the paradigm.
It changes the entire objective. You are not being asked to smile at the boulder.
Yeah.
You don't have to paint it a pretty color and pretend it was a gift from the universe that made you stronger.
Oh, thank goodness.
Mm.
Because I hate that advice.
Right. It's the worst. And you certainly don't have to say the person who deliberately dropped it in your path was right to do so. Justifying the event is completely unnecessary. Denying the genuine pain it caused in the moment is unnecessary.
So it's purely an internal eviction notice.
Yes. It is about your own internal ecosystem. You are releasing the need to oppose it internally because your opposition is only destroying you.
Because your bleeding hands aren't hurting the rock.
Exactly. The rock doesn't care. When that hatred, that mechanical resistance is removed, the event loses its grip. The text uses this powerful phrase saying it transforms from a wound into information.
Let's really dissect that shift, because turning a wound into information is such a potent concept. A wound is highly sensitive, right? It's physiological.
Very much so.
When you have an open wound, it hurts when something brushes against it, it bleeds, it demands immediate, urgent attention from your body.
A wound commands your entire nervous system. When you are wounded, your brain's primary objective is survival. It's pumping out cortisol and adrenaline.
You can't just ignore it.
No, you can't focus on building a new project or being deeply present with a loved one because your internal alarm bells are deafening. You are operating in a state of continuous emergency triage.
Your brain is treating a memory as an active present tense threat.
Yes. But information?
Yeah.
Well, information doesn't trigger an alarm bell.
Right. Information is just data.
Exactly. Information doesn't bleed. It's a map. Think about touching a hot stove.
Okay.
In the moment you touch it, the burn is a severe wound. But once that burn heals, what you are left with is information. The stove is hot.
You don't walk around for the next 20 years actively hating the stove.
No. You don't spend hours every morning screaming at the concept of thermodynamics.
Right. You simply integrate the data stoves are hot and you adjust your behavior accordingly.
The event loses its emotional stranglehold and becomes a neutral tool for navigation. That is what moving from wound to information means.
So how does that cognitive shift actually happen? How do we take something that feels like an open wound and cool it down into data? Because undoing the past doesn't mean literal time travel.
Obviously not. You can't untouch the stove.
Right. So what's the mechanism?
It requires a conscious interruption of your own physiological response. Undoing what has been done does not mean a literal reversal. It means transforming the internal relationship to the event.
So catching yourself in the act of resisting.
Exactly. When the memory flares up, your instinct is to fight it, to tense your body, to argue with it in your head. To turn it into information, you have to notice that physical tension and actively allow it to drop.
You acknowledge the memory is there, but you refuse to supply it with the adrenaline of your resistance.
Yes, the text says that what was once held in resistance can be reabsorbed into understanding.
Reabsorbed. Wow, like letting a chapter in a book just be a chapter rather than trying to rip the pages out.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
When you read a history book about the fall of an empire, you aren't terrified of the ending.
Right, you already know what happens. It's integrated knowledge.
But when you fight your own past, you are reading your own history while constantly trying to rip the pages out before the bad thing happens.
And the act of trying to rip out immovable pages is the very thing keeping you stuck in that exact chapter.
Because the pages are fixed in form. They aren't going anywhere.
Okay, so we've mapped out that the past is unchangeable, our suffering is fueled by our mechanical resistance to it, and the solution is this physiological and cognitive shift from wound to information.
Right.
But what is the tangible payoff here? If you actually manage to let your hands drop from the boulder, what happens next?
Well, this is where we get into the physics of integration. It's about the literal reclamation of our energy.
Here's where it gets really interesting because I was trying to find a modern equivalent for this energy transfer, and it immediately made me think of our smartphones.
Oh, I love a good tech analogy. Let's hear it.
If you know when your phone gets incredibly hot, the screen starts lagging and the battery is draining at an alarming rate, but you aren't even really doing anything on it.
Oh, it's infuriating. You're just trying to open a basic application and the entire system is freezing up.
Right. Because hidden out of sight, deep in the background, there is a corrupted app running in an endless, frantic loop.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
It is demanding massive amounts of processing power and silently draining your battery. Hatred, that mechanical resistance to the past, is that corrupted app.
That makes perfect sense.
It's a background process running 24/7. You might be trying to go to work, build a healthy relationship, or just enjoy a quiet evening on the couch, but you feel exhausted.
You have a short temper.
You have zero creative drive, and you wonder why you feel so empty when you haven't done anything strenuous.
It is because all your internal battery power is being silently cannibalized by the act of opposing a boulder that won't move.
Yes.
That is the perfect mechanical translation of what's happening in our brains.
Right.
Because what actually happens when you finally open your phone's settings, identify that corrupted app, and force close it.
It's instantaneous. The phone physically cools down, the battery percentage stabilizes. Suddenly, the entire operating system runs smoothly again.
Yes, and integration, the act of dropping the resistance, is a psychological equivalent of force closing that background app.
So you aren't deleting the phone's hard drive.
No, not at all. The data of what happened in the past is still stored there, but the active processing power that was dedicated to fighting that data is instantly released back into the system.
The energy becomes available again.
Exactly. This freed up energy doesn't just vanish, it immediately becomes available for what we actually want to do: creation, direction, and clarity.
It's a massive influx of hijacked resources returning to your control. You suddenly have the battery life to use your mind to build your future, rather than endlessly litigating your history.
Because forward movement comes from this integration, not from erasing the past, but from no longer being defined by it.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it redefines what healing actually means. Healing isn't acquiring amnesia. Healing is resource reallocation.
That is profound. When you are defined by an unintegrated past, every single decision you make is just a reaction to that wound.
Right. You're either desperately moving towards something to compensate for what you lost,
Or you are running as fast as you can to avoid repeating the pain. Either way, your entire life's trajectory is still being dictated by the boulder.
you are still orienting your entire compass around the thing you hate.
But when you integrate it, when it cools down into mere information, it becomes just another landmark on the map. It's there, but it doesn't possess a magnetic pull anymore.
You can choose to walk in any direction.
Exactly. And that brings us to this incredibly profound conclusion in the text regarding what happens to the pain itself. In this state of integration, what was hated dissolves.
Dissolves. The imagery there is so compelling.
It is. It doesn't shatter. It doesn't vanish in a puff of smoke. It just loses its integrity. not because it never happened, but because it is no longer held in opposition.
Think about the physical tension required to hold a heavy object in opposition. Like, if you hold a massive dictionary out straight at arm's length, within minutes your muscles are screaming.
Your joints ache, your entire body is trembling.
Right. The book feels incredibly dominant and oppressive. But if you just let your arm drop and place the book on the table, well, the book didn't cease to exist.
Its form is exactly the same.
But its agonizing weight on your body has dissolved. The active opposition was the scaffolding that was holding the suffering up.
When you remove your own scaffolding, the structure of the suffering simply collapses.
The event is still sitting right there on the table. It just isn't tearing your shoulder out of its socket anymore.
The architecture of your suffering requires your constant active participation to remain standing. When you withdraw that background processing power, the structure dissolves back into a neutral environment.
So, what does this all mean? We've covered a lot of ground here today.
I really have.
We journeyed from recognizing that the past is fixed in form like the rigid concrete blueprint of a house.
Right, acknowledging that the raw data of what has happened is entirely unchangeable.
And then we explored the uncomfortable reality that our suffering isn't generated by the event itself, but by our exhausting mechanical resistance to it, the bleeding hands pushing against the immovable boulder.
And we tackled the natural fear that acceptance is just toxic positivity.
Right. We realized that transforming a wound into information requires zero justification of the past. It is simply an internal eviction of the tension.
It's so liberating when you really internalize that distinction.
And finally, we saw the incredible tangible payoff. By force closing the corrupted background app of our resistance, the scaffolding of our suffering dissolves.
We reclaim a massive reservoir of energy, reallocating it toward creation and clarity.
We aren't erasing our history. We are just finally taking our hands off the rock.
Which leaves us with the fascinating hypothetical to consider.
Oh, I'm ready. Let's hear it.
If the text is right, that the past is fixed in form, but not in meaning, and if we free up all this new energy by stopping our resistance,
Yeah.
it means the final meaning of your most difficult memories hasn't actually been written yet.
Hey, really?
Yeah, it's waiting to be written by the very energy you free up today.
Wow. That is a staggering amount of potential energy just waiting to be unlocked. It makes you look at the world completely
It
differently.
really does.
So if you are joining us today as you go about the rest of your week, we encourage you to just notice without any judgment where you might still be pushing against a boulder in your own life.
Pay attention to where you are burning precious battery life in opposition to a past that cannot change.
The blueprint of your history might be fixed in concrete, but how you design the interior of your life today, that is entirely up to you. Until next time, thanks for taking the deep dive.